Parthaya pratibodhitam bhagavata narayanena swayam vyasena gratitam purana munina madhye mahabharatam advaita amrita varshinim bhagavatim ashtadasha atyayinim ambatva anusandadhami Bhagavad Gita Bhavadveshinim. O Mother, Bhagavad Gita, I repeatedly meditate on you who are the 18 chapters in the middle of the Mahabharata, composed by the ancient sage Vyasa, taught for the benefit of Partha by the Lord Narayana himself, the goddess, the shower of the nectar of Advaitam, the enemy of rebirth. The Anandamaya Kosha is quite a big topic, and I wasn't quite satisfied with my short answer last week. So I want to bring the fullness of this Anandamaya Kosha in this session, because I don't want to let things just slip by and then we just sort of let it out, because you're probably not going to attend to it again. So I might as well just cover it while we are going through the course. So chapter 13, we are now on. And this is the topic of discrimination between the knower and the known. And this discrimination or this discernment, to discern one from the other, what is the purpose of this? What is the sake of? It is for the sake of obtaining proper perspective while we are living in this world as individuals. So we're not just about theorizing what is kshetra and what is kshetrajna. It is really, end of the day, about having a proper responses, having a proper transactional dealings with others around you, knowing how to respond in an intelligent way with clarity, knowing how to make the right decisions. But at the same time, it allows us, the individual, to enjoy our very intrinsic freedom in and through all of our transactions. So there's a two-part benefit. One of them is knowing how to respond, and the other is knowing that you are intrinsically free in and through all of your transactions of the world. So what kind of proper perspective can we gain through understanding this knowledge? The most common one is desire management. First of all, involves understanding there's two extremes when it comes to desires. The first extreme is give up all your desires. This is impossible. The reason is because everyone is born, including you and I, with a talent. Now, if you just put that talent away and you know there's a talent inside you and you learned, don't desire, are you going to feel happy? You're not going to be happy at all, because just to be born with a talent, how do you express that talent? In a form of desire. I desire to engage with the world by the means of my inborn innate talents, uniquely specified or given to you. And also the world, if you think about it, is designed that when you express your talents, your abilities, then, and you do so in a proper, meaningful way that contributes to the society, that means it's a dharmic way, then at the same time, it nourishes you. I'm sure this is your experience, right? When you give out your talent, your desire, not only does it help the community, your family, but also at the same time, it helps you. So first of all, this desire management needs to be addressed properly. What's the proper perspective about desire or towards desire? Simply knowing how to make the best use of our desire. That means the use whereby we can actually benefit and give the best of our abilities through our desire. That is a proper perspective. The person starts to spend their whole life chasing for big things. So in other words, through the course of time, what happens is the person is unable to enjoy the subtleties, the subtle small things of life. In other words, the small things like a little flower or a little gentle touch, it's insufficient, right? Or a little sunset or rain, it's insufficient. Why? Because all life the person has spent into big things. So if I focus on big things, because I don't know who I am, I don't know my nature as kshetrajna, then at the same time, that's going to cut off this ability to enjoy the small things in life. That's why wise people, they're happy for no reason. You don't need to, bring them or give them anything. They're just naturally happy with the environment because the small things are always around you. The second perspective or proper perspective that needs to be addressed is relationships. If the person puts all of their happiness into a relationship, then the relationship itself becomes a burden because you have no choice but to demand from the other in order for you to feel happy. So in other words, the first thing that we need to understand in a relationship is there is not one person in this universe that can satisfy all of your desires. No relationship can ever satisfy all your desires. Why? Because the person is limited, and so are you limited. So you cannot satisfy their desires. They cannot satisfy your desires. Now, suppose that you don't have this knowledge. Then what happens? Then I have no choice but to keep asking for my partner to provide my desires, but they can't. So in other words, once we understand this knowledge, then we're able to, our relationship simultaneously transforms because we're no longer asking for things that are unrealistic, that cannot be provided. There are times when you won't feel valued. There are times when you won't have your desire fulfilled. There are times when you won't feel respected. But if you understand your fullness, then it's not like you don't care. It's not like, oh, I'm not feel valued. It doesn't matter. I'm full. It's not like that. It's just that you're able to respond with a lot more objectivity, a lot more clarity, because you're just happy with yourself. So this means that this knowledge helps us to intelligently respond to these situations whereby they do not give us always what we desire. We don't get angry, but we have come from a place of understanding. The third proper perspective to be gained is in being an active participant. Not a passive participant, but an active participant in life. That means a participant who participates through and by the universal orders, through dharmic principles. And what is this proper perspective? It is, I am an essential link in this grand scheme of things. I'm not outside the system. Are you ever outside the system? No. In other words, knowing this, you don't fight the system, nor criticize the system, because you're part of the system. You want to investigate the system, because you're part of the system. And it's in your interest to investigate the system, because if I don't investigate the system, then I suffer, because I'm the one that makes the mistakes if I don't understand the system. And you desire to proactively contribute to the society. Why? Because it makes you happy. So these are all proper perspectives that we gain through the Bhagavad Gita, one of the three perspectives. So why am I showing you this? To show you that this is just not theory. It transforms into clarity. Why is this kshetra and kshetrajna topic, this discrimination, significant? How does it start? If there was a beginning, there's no beginning, but if there was a beginning, it goes like this. I am limitless and the truth of everything. And this limitlessness identifies with one single limited individual. In other words, limitlessness conditioned by the 5 koshas. At the same time, inherently understanding my nature is boundless. That one, then what do? They compensate by trying to fill the 5 koshas, trying to give to the 5 koshas, because I am this 5 koshas. So therefore, the whole life goes into constant giving to one of these, either to your body, to feeling more energized, feeling better. It's all about feeling good. A relationship, for the most part, is about actually just, having a companion so you can feel good. In other words, I need a companion so that I can satisfy my Manomaya Kosha. And these relationships don't last very long, by the way. So the more the relationship is focused on the grosser Kosha, the shorter it lasts. Because if the body wants another body, the Anandamaya Kosha, then it's only going to be as good as the Anandamaya Kosha. If the relationship is on the basis of the Manomaya Kosha, that means I want you for emotional support and you want me for my emotional support, that's only going to last as short as I need that emotional support. If we're both relating to the Vijnanamaya Kosha, then we have a much more mature relationship because now we can engage properly. Limitlessness now goes compensating through doing things in this world in order to fill itself up. And then what happens? The world serves as a reminder of my smallness, of my limitations. And then this produces low self-esteem. I start to ask the world to fill me up. All of this by not understanding my limitless nature. And then one isolates themselves from knowledge, because every time one is reminded of how little we know, what do? We don't feel good about ourselves. For example, if I show a rose, right? And you say, it's a red rose. And I ask you, what is this? And you say, it's a red rose. And you feel happy. Now, suppose I ask you, what makes this rose red and not yellow? Do you know? Already we don't know. And then what happens? Instant unhappiness. So because of this, what do? We isolate ourselves unconsciously in the world of knowns. That means I only stay in my little sphere of knowns. And therefore learning becomes a pain in itself, because it reminds me of how little I know. So even learning itself becomes a huge turnoff. So all of these factors start to then contribute into the person's psyche. So you can see a human being is not so simple. There's so many things that it's not just a matter of, so your parents or your school teachers were not that kind, or they didn't show you how to learn properly. It's not just parents or teachers. There's also the much vaster picture, the reminder of my smallness. And then if I go into a world of knowledge, then I am reminded of how little I know. So it's better to stay in a comfort zone than go outside the comfort zone. Or what about if you identify with Anandamaya Kosha, the physical body? Then that itself becomes a reminder of aging. So aging itself becomes a source of unhappiness. Or suppose we rely on the Vijnanamaya Kosha, on our thoughts, right? Suppose you identify with how smart you are, how sharp you are. Suppose you're a good practitioner or a therapist, and there's a better therapist, or suddenly you realize, I'm kind of losing my ability through the years. Then what happens? Because our eye is placed in the Vijnanamaya Kosha, then our eye goes right along with that skill loss. So all of these complications come from this one simple lack of knowledge, which is not knowing my inherent nature. So the next question is, what is the means of shifting this I to proper perspective? How do we do this? And in verse 1, we talked about Panchakosha. This comes from the Taittiriya Upanishad, and it's a method of identifying the kshetram in reference to your body-mind. So we're now sticking just with the body-mind. And what's the conclusion that we formed from our Panchakosha? We said that when these 5 koshas apparently cover the kshetrajna, then life becomes centered on filling these 5 koshas. So it becomes about attending to your physical body, more beauty, bigger muscles, asking partner to fill you emotionally, or if they're unable to, then not feeling satisfied with that ability. So then we go elsewhere, right? Or constantly chasing for more knowledge, and more ideas, more notions, more books, news. This is identification with the Vijnanamaya Kosha, always stimulating the intellect through the news. So how do we find contentment? By filling the 5 koshas. It's actually more than 4 koshas. You don't fill the 5th kosha because that's the causal body. But where does the real contentment lie? It lies in discovering I am whole. Because no matter what you do, because the nature of the 4 koshas are limited in nature, no matter how much we fill them up, it is never, ever going to fill us up. Impossible. So the only solution to permanent contentment is understanding I am whole and complete right now, right here, while living. That is why our journey can go for years and years, and it just doesn't please us, because the fundamental question, the fundamental ignorance hasn't been removed yet. And that ignorance is preventing me from recognizing that I'm full right now. One point that I want to mention is it's important to understand this disidentification from the 5 koshas. This is not experiential, by the way. It's not like you're supposed to now go, okay, I'm not supposed to feel anything. I'm not supposed to care about my thoughts. I'm not supposed to care about this body. I'm not supposed to care about the energy levels of this person. We're not doing that at all. This is not, it's not supposed to be an experience whereby you feel like you're above this person. This is the common mistake that most people make. They think they're supposed to separate and not identify with this person at all. Rather, this is a matter of disidentification by firm conclusion. That means you firmly understand, yes, indeed, this person, these four koshas are going through a process, but these processes are going for everyone, not just me, not just this person. So it is simply on a basis of a firm conclusion and not an experience. You're not supposed to experience yourself being above yourself or above the world, because that negates what Advaita is saying. What is Advaita saying? You are part of the interconnected whole. You have a part to play in this society. So there's no question of disidentifying from yourself or from anyone in this world. Now, how do we practice this, for example, these 5 koshas? Suppose you say, I feel off today. Then you can just say, for example, the feeling belongs to the Manomaya Kosha. Just take a little moment to acknowledge that, and then go and address it. Go and address it. I didn't say ignore it, because that is not what we're saying at all. Suppose you say, I feel insignificant. I don't feel important. Then you just say, okay, this conclusion belongs to the buddhi, to the Vijnanamaya Kosha. And then go and address it. Again, we're not ever denying the problem-solving mode. You're simply acknowledging what is happening, step 2, and then you go and address it as usual. And what's the result of this practice? Through the course of time, by the way, this does take some time. So it's not an overnight process. It's not, 1 year process. It can take 1, 2, or 3 years. What's the result of this? Through the course of time, the buddhi stops generating opinions about the world. In other words, it stops being an opinion generator and rather becomes an objective instrument that's capable of seeing things as they are. It just sees. It doesn't have a need to wallpaper its own opinion over, slap it over and say, here's what it is. So this means we gain a level of objectivity towards our own emotions, our own thoughts, our own inadequacies, and strengths and weaknesses, both ways, and the world. But we don't have this need to put an opinion just for our own sake. Because you notice that whenever a person criticizes, it is actually for whose sake? It is for the criticizer's sake. It's to make them happy. I'll cut you off, right? So that I can feel good about myself. So this stops. In other words, you become as though your own psychologist. That's pretty cool, right? Having your own psychologist. What becomes a psychologist? The buddhi becomes a psychologist towards your entire 4 koshas. Or instead of saying, for example, how to practice this, instead of saying this is my emotion, this is my life, then rather you can get curious. You can start to get into a problem-solving mode. So before the koshas, before that knowledge, it was about, this is my emotion, and why am I going through this every day? Why do I feel like this disempowered, or like this, or empowered also? Now it's about, okay, this is coming through. It is, let me acknowledge it, and now let me deal with it. Let me confront it intelligently. So the conclusion of these 5 koshas was, I am not what I experience. The experiencer and the experienced can never be the same. This is just logic. That was our conclusion. Now, these 5 koshas have more to them. They also have a teaching of cause-effect relationship.
So,
because
I have one question.
Yes, please.
The moment we say experiencer and experience are different, so that introduces dualism, right? So how can it be under non-dualism?
No, it's not duality. It's preliminary. It sounds like duality, but it's only a preliminary understanding. Then later on, I'll use, for example, the pot and clay example to show you that the experiencer is actually the experience. They're one and the same. Right? There's no difference between them. So initially, we do create this distinction between the experiencer and the experienced. Yeah, and then later on, we collapse that difference. Okay. So these 5 koshas also have an important teaching of cause and effect. Because anything in this universe has a cause-effect relationship. There is not one thing, there's not one product or one effect that you can find without a preceding cause. In that same way, these 5 koshas carry a cause-effect relationship. Specifically, the Pranamaya Kosha corresponds to your Kriya Shakti. That means your power to do. Why is it not the Anandamaya Kosha? Because if you think about the Anandamaya Kosha, yes, the body does do. You know, your hand does the moving of the glass. You know, your mouth moves and produces voice. But we don't use the Anandamaya Kosha because technically it's already included in the Pranamaya Kosha. So the Pranamaya Kosha corresponds to the Kriya Shakti, the power to do. The Manomaya Kosha corresponds to Icha Shakti, the power to desire. And the Vijnanamaya Kosha corresponds to Jnana Shakti, power to know. So last week, there was a question, first of all, before I move on, that asked, you know, how do I identify, I was stuck at the Pranamaya Kosha, how do I know which is the Manomaya Kosha? This answer is very simple. The very desire to know, which is the Manomaya Kosha, that very desire is the Manomaya Kosha. So desire itself is the Manomaya Kosha. Desire to understand, desire to, to figure things out, that is all Manomaya Kosha. So now the question is, in which order do these 3 koshas arise? And I'll give you the logic later. There's a specific order. For example, first knowledge arises of anything. Then, so that's Vijnanamaya Kosha, right? Then there is a desire. Desire comes because desire is a product of knowledge. Now, what's the logic for this? Why does desire come after knowledge? Because you can't desire something unless you know what you are desiring and you know that it is worthy of desiring. Therefore, first Vijnanamaya Kosha, and then logically, desire has to come second. Once desire comes, then we'd go and do, that is through the Pranamaya or the Anandamaya Kosha. So in other words, desire then, according to this logic, must be outer, must be the effect, and the Vijnanamaya Kosha must be more inner, the cause. So this is why I introduced initially, there is a cause-effect relationship between these koshas. So if you ask, how did the rishis come up with this knowledge? How did they invent, prove me the order of these koshas? Because what do we say? The most subtle is the causal body. And then you got the Vijnanamaya, and then the Manomaya, and then Pranamaya, and then the Anandamaya Kosha. I just gave you the logic now. Because you cannot desire unless you know what you are desiring. And you cannot know what you're desiring unless there is a habit about that particular object. And where does habit belong to? Causal body, the samskara. So there's a direct logic to show that these 5 koshas indeed are in the right order. Summary, the preceding kosha is the cause, and the succeeding kosha is the effect. So this means the 5 koshas enjoy a satya mithya relationship, just like I explained last week. The physical body is mithya in relation to Pranamaya Kosha because it depends on the Pranamaya Kosha. From the standpoint of the Pranamaya Kosha, it is mithya in reference to the Manomaya Kosha. So now Manomaya Kosha is satyam because the Pranamaya depends on the Manomaya. From the standpoint of the Manomaya Kosha, it is now mithya, but what is satyam? Vijnanamaya Kosha. Now Vijnanamaya Kosha becomes mithya, but what is satyam? The Anandamaya Kosha, the causal body. And then finding the causal body is also mithya. And what's satyam now? Kshetrajna, the knower in whom these 5 koshas are. Okay, so in other words, these 5 koshas enjoy a satya-mithya relationship. In short, a cause-effect. So this cause-effect is an important teaching because anywhere in this universe you look, it is a cause-effect relationship. It is no different with these 5 koshas.
So the exact, I always had this confusion. What is the exact definition of mithya? Because many sources are giving many different definitions.
Sure. So mithya just means dependent on something else. Yeah. So just like this pot, this form is mithya. When I say mithya, it's just dependent on something else, and that is the clay. But then clay itself is mithya, isn't it? Because clay itself depends on silica. But silica is also mithya, isn't it? Because that depends on atoms. But atoms are also mithya, aren't they? Because they depend on neutrons and protons. But they're also mithya, aren't they? Because they need to revolve around in space. But space and time is also mithya, isn't it? Because where was space and time before the Big Bang, before creation came?
So it is dependent and independent. Is that the
exactly independent and dependent?
Okay.
Satya independent and mithya dependent.
So, but then it should be asatya then, or what is it? Asatya and mithya. What is the difference between asatya and mithya then?
Asat.
Asatya.
I'm not going to talk about asat non-existence right now.
Okay.
Because it's not the right topic. Yeah, this is a little bit. I know what you're talking about. Okay. Okay. Now we have the Vijnanamaya Kosha. I'm not going to talk about the previous Manomaya because that's pretty easy. Vijnanamaya Kosha, what is it? It is a deciding mechanism. So if you're asking right now, should I ask or not? For example, Pavan just made use of this mechanism called Vijnanamaya Kosha, and there was a decision process. Okay, I'm going to ask, and therefore he pressed the unmute button, and therefore the Anandamaya Kosha produced sounds through the vocal cords, and therefore this person heard. Okay, should I or should I not? Is this right, or is there room for improvement? How do I apply this in my life? In which way should I confront this issue? In this way or in that way? This is all Vijnanamaya working in the background. Okay. And then we have the Ahamkara. Remember, Ahamkara is part of Vijnanamaya Kosha. Why do we have a different name? Just to separate and help us understand this extra component of the Ahamkara. So whenever I say Vijnanamaya Kosha, I'm also including the Ahamkara. Whenever I say Ahamkara, I'm also including the Vijnanamaya Kosha. So what is the Ahamkara? It is the conditioned kshetrajna. That means the conditioned knower. In other words, I, kshetrajna, know that I am ignorant. I, kshetrajna, am ignorant. I, kshetrajna, am creative, am silly, am smart, am etc. So in other words, all of these adjectives or these descriptions are referring back to the kshetrajna. So it seems like the kshetrajna is conditioned by the smartness. It seems like the kshetrajna is conditioned by the dullness. But in the presence of the kshetrajna, they all get their chance. They all are illumined in the presence of this kshetrajna. So this is why we say Ahamkara is the conditioned kshetrajna. Conditioned by what? By the 4 koshas. So, for example, Robert's Ahamkara is conditioned kshetrajna. What is those conditions? The conditions in Robert's 4 koshas. In this case, 5 koshas. Nagesh is the same kshetrajna conditioned by what? By Nagesh's 5 koshas. So 1 kshetrajna conditioned by 7.8 billion 5 koshas, jivas. Okay.
Is this also called jiva?
What's it called?
Conditioned knower. The conditioned knower, is it jiva or is it different?
Sure. So good. So when we say jiva, we're actually referring to all 5 koshas. Okay. So what is Ahamkara? Conditioned kshetrajna. And this Ahamkara, it perishes at the time of, it only perishes at the time of videha mukti. What is videha mukti? It is when a jnani, a wise person, physically dies. Now, I said perish. You will probably, if you think back, I said some time ago that nothing in this universe can perish. Where is it going to go? Nothing in this universe can go out of existence. So then what happens to the jnanis Ahamkara upon physical death. It simply becomes at one with the total Ahamkara of the entire Ishvara. In other words, Jnani's Ahamkara is now Ishvara's Ahamkara. There's no such things as Ahamkara going out of existence. Where is it going to go? So now imagine when people say, you need to destroy your ego. This is clearly a mind that is speaking, that is yet to learn a few things about what Ahamkara really means. In other words, there's no destruction of anything. And this is an important point because sometimes we think that, okay, so moksha means this person is going to get destroyed. And since I'm so attached to this person, I don't want to let them go. So what do? We sabotage our own efforts to understand the fullness of this knowledge. But what is Vedanta actually saying? Nobody goes anywhere. The same person is still present before in a stage of normality and a stage of knowledge. Simply understanding, a different understanding is now taking place. That's all that arises in the mind, in the buddhi specifically.
So why do we conclude that Ahamkara does not get non-existent? What is it? Is it simply because nothing goes out of existence? Is that the reason?
Yeah, right now the Ahamkara is localizing Pavan into one individual. So upon death, that Ahamkara simply is at one with everything. So this means at one with Ishvara. That's all that happens for a Jivan Muktaha. Okay. So in other words, Jivan Muktaha in the stage of being a human being experiences this body, but also himself, right? Just like we all experience ourselves, a self-evident I. So upon death, Jivan Muktahas, the koshas, the 5 sheets simply fall away. And then what happens? The I, who you are right now enjoys the entire universe, enjoys the entire both awareness, but also Ishvara, all knowledge, all power. In other words, nothing got removed. Simply, it is as though you've gained much more now. Why? Because you're no longer limited by this jiva 5 koshas. So this is why we experience limitation while living in this physical body, because it's a small body, right? You only occupy this much. How can you experience limitlessness living this much or being this much? Can't. But when these 5 koshas disappear, then that limitation is there no more. Therefore, the jiva is now at one with Ishvara. The question is, how do you recognize this ahamkara? How do we pinpoint it? How do we identify it? The answer is, it is the roles that you play every single moment. For example, right now, you're playing the role of the listener. When this class ends, you'll be playing the role of the evaluator, how this class went, for example. Tomorrow morning, you'll be playing the role of maybe an employee or maybe a caring partner. So all throughout our lives, what do we experience? We experience this person going through a series of roles, one role after the other. Is this your experience? I'm sure it is, right? So what is ahamkara? It is that individual who is undergoing from role to role. So you cannot be the role player. You have to be other than the role player, because there needs to be an unchanging principle which is able to identify the differences between every single role. Why is ahamkara not kshetrajna? Ahamkara is savikara. Savikara means it is a doer enjoyer that is constantly in a state of modification. Now I'm enjoying this, next moment I'll be enjoying that. Now I'm enjoying this food, next moment I'm enjoying the kiss, next moment I'm enjoying the movie, next moment I'm enjoying sleep, and then I'm enjoying waking up, and then I'm enjoying reading a book. Constant enjoyer all life. So what does ahamkara mean? Savikara. In other words, it undergoes modifications. What undergoes modifications? The doer, in other words, you do different things. The role player does different things according to the role which it takes on, but also there is a enjoyer. That means depending on which role is played, also depends on what enjoyment is there or not there. Whereas kshetrajna is nirvikara. In other words, it is not subject to change. For example, I am not stuck with any one particular role. How do we prove that you're kshetrajna? do you undergo the same role every single moment of your life? Absolutely not. You're free to one moment be the role of a listener, and then the role of a teacher, and then the role of a lover, and then the role of a questioner, and then the role of someone who is certain, and then a role of someone who is doubtful. All lifelong, we go through millions and millions of roles every single hour. Therefore, I cannot be Ahamkara because I am free of the role. Second is, if I was Ahamkara, then the role playing would not end in deep sleep, but it clearly does end in deep sleep. Therefore, I cannot be the Ahamkara because there's no roles played out and there's no enjoyment there's no doer or enjoyer in deep sleep. The third reason is Ahamkara is inert. In other words, it's made out of 5 elements, which I will get to in later verses. And this Ahamkara appears sentient because it is borrowing consciousness called Pratibimba Chaitanya. So what is borrowed consciousness? It is, for example, suppose that you stand in front of a mirror and there's an individual there. And the individual now in the mirror goes, oh, look at my glories. I am alive. I am conscious. But that individual is only enjoying its existence. Why? Because of you, the person standing in front of the mirror. So what is Pratibimba Chaitanya? It means it's reflected consciousness from the original consciousness. One point I want to point out. Don't think this reflected consciousness is like original consciousness is over there at some point, and then the reflection is over here. So this is just a concept to help us understand original consciousness and reflected consciousness. What is reflected consciousness? Ahamkara. That means consciousness that is conditioned by the 5 koshas. Ahamkara is also conditioned to a single body, to a single individual, and it also travels upon death. This is why near-death experiences, you have people report, there was death and then I saw the lights, or I saw, someone that I could relate to. I saw some deity, some devata, and then they came back, right? There was they came back, and then to tell the story, they said the story, I was dead, and then the doctors confirm, you were like dead for 15 minutes, and then the person reports the entire experience. In other words, the Ahamkara is the traveler, but also contained to one single individual body, because the traveler is only related to the person that died. It's not related to someone else. Whereas the Kshetrajna is not a traveler and also is not contained to one single individual body. Just like space. Does space need to travel? No. In the presence of space, there is traveling. Is space confined to one single room? No. The space in this room is the very same space in the room that you're listening to or from now. The space accommodating this room is the same space accommodating that room. So it is like space. The Ahamkara and the Vijnanamaya Kosha is subject to arrival and departure. So in other words, thoughts come and go. Emotions come and go, right? Conclusions come and go. Yesterday I concluded this, and now my conclusion is different. But the knower survives in order to report the changes undergone through the Vijnanamaya Kosha. That's why we change our minds. Oh, I changed my mind. I had this thought and now I have this thought. What survived to tell the story? The Kshetrajna, the knower in and through every thought, every conclusion. In other words, the conclusion doesn't actually condition the knower, the Kshetrajna. If it did condition the Kshetrajna, what would be the logical problem with that? Then you would not know the thoughts you had just a moment ago, because you would be the new thought. You would have no relation to what happened before. Next is the causal body. Now I will introduce, when I say causal body, I will say both Karana Sharira, but I will also now add Anandamaya Kosha.
So when I say I am conscious, is that the ego, the Ahamkara? There's a very subtle difference between I am and
Kshetrajna is the silent knower, because of which I know that I said I am. So if you say I am right now, right?
Yeah.
There's absolute consciousness of the fact that you said that or that you thought that. So even the I am is a thought. You don't need to say I am to exist, to know that you are. So in other words, to say I am does not condition consciousness. Consciousness is in and through present, waiting for you to say I am, but also present when you're not saying I am. So even if you ask this question, for example, right now, that was what's called the Ahamkara. Right now, there was a role, and it was a role person playing the role of a questioner. This I am, who is this I am? And, do I need to be, is this the kshetrajna? So the role has now ended because you stopped asking the question, but there is still this presence, which which is evident to yourself. And this presence is the kshetrajna. Say I am, don't say I am, I still know that I am, without having to say that I am.
Can I say that this I am is a product created by brain, and the kshetrajna is the experiencer of that I am thought?
Yeah, kshetrajna is the experiencer that's always present, whether the I am or the I am is said or not.
Okay. So it's related to that adhyasa bhashya, essentially?
Adhyasa superimposition, I will talk about.
Is it related to that, or is it
What?
Is it related to that? What you're saying, is it related to adhyasa?
Superimposition?
Yeah. Superimposition
I want to bring superimposition now. That's another topic now.
Sure.
I will bring it when we talk about ignorance, though. Okay. So the Anandamaya Kosha, what is it? In simple terms, when I say causal body or Anandamaya Kosha or Karana Sharira, what I'm talking about is what's supposed to happen tomorrow is the causal body. Right now, you're going through experiences, right? Feeling in a certain way. Did you ever notice how sometimes you wake up and you go through a certain day and it's kind of different than it was yesterday? In fact, every day is like that, isn't it? So it's not new. So what dictates the theme of your day? The causal body, because it's the body that causes the kind of experiences, the kind of punya papa, the kind of pleasant and unpleasant experiences that this person will undergo, that will go through. Now, the causal body has several functions. The first is it contains the individual's beginningless sanchita karma. Sanchita karma means all effects yet to be experienced in future lifetimes. All of that is contained in the causal body. Also, it contains the impressions or the memories of past lives. So whenever the person accesses their past life, where is that coming from? The causal body. The impressions isolated to one single individual. The second function of the causal body, Anandamaya Kosha, Karana Sharira, is it contains the prarabdha karma for the present life. Now, when I say prarabdha karma, all I am talking about is pleasant and unpleasant experiences yet to fructify. So what is prarabdha karma? You will now answer pleasant or unpleasant experiences yet to fructify. That means they haven't fructified by their will. So pleasant and unpleasant in Sanskrit we call punya papa. So what is prarabdha karma? Punya papa experiences yet to occur in the future. And this is contained in the causal body. For example, in deep sleep, where do the four koshas go? We discussed this last week. They resolve into the causal body, into the Anandamaya Kosha. But when these four koshas come out, when they manifest in the waking state, then the causal body fructifies the punya papa, that is the pleasant and unpleasant experiences that are to occur for today. In other words, they carry over the punya papa from yesterday into today. This is why, by the way, you will often experience whatever day you had right before sleep, whatever thought you put, or whatever theme you're going that last 1 hour. The moment you wake up, what happens? Immediately that theme, that feeling arises the first thing you wake up. It quickly comes back. In other words, where did it go? It went into the causal body. So the causal body fructifies those pleasant and unpleasant experiences of yesterday. It fructifies it into today. In other words, there's no escape. This is why even a suicide, what happens upon a suicide? The person simply carries over those impressions into the next life, and that papam simply continues in the form of experiences that reflect the behavior that has been undergone in the past life. Now, the objection was brought up. Why is there bliss in deep sleep when deep sleep, the causal body, contains both your punya and papa karma, right? In other words, why is there bliss if punya and papa are both in the causal body? Because I'm supposed to experience then also pain in deep sleep, right? Because you also got some papa there. Okay. She also asked, where is the bliss of sleep coming from? She also asked, what is the nature of that bliss? And then she also asked, why is bliss felt in deep sleep? Brilliant questions, I tell you. So I want to answer them now. So first of all, during deep sleep, individuals' punya papa is in potential. Point number one. In deep sleep, where does all of that punya papa, those pleasant and unpleasant experiences, where do they go? They go in the causal body, but they're now in potential. That means they're not active. Now you're going to say, where's the proof of this? How do you know they're in potential in the causal body? Because if they were not in potential, then you would be awake. Simple as that. In other words, punya papa only becomes activated in the waking state. This is why what you're going through your day consists of pleasant and unpleasant experiences. This is everyone's experience in the entire world from the past, present, and the future. But all of that goes into potential. And because it's in potential, there's no instrument required. The four koshas are not required in order to express those punya papams. Therefore, there's no four koshas at all. Because the punya papam, the prarabdha karma is in potential. Therefore, the punya papa is not experienced at all in sleep. That's point number one. However, it still doesn't answer this. Then what is the source of bliss in sleep? Where is that bliss coming from? So this is where I have to bring another topic. The causal body also has another function, and that is, it is a reflecting medium of original Ananda. When I say original Ananda, what is the nature of Brahman, which I spoke last few sessions ago? Sat Chit Ananda. In other words, what is the nature? What is the causal body? That which reflects the original Ananda. That is why it's called the Anandamaya Kosha, because it is reflecting your very own bliss, your very own limitlessness. We'll call it for now happiness, so you can relate to it. I'm not going to use the word limitlessness. It's going to get, you cannot quite quantify that. So again, during deep sleep, that bliss that you feel in deep sleep that nobody can deny, the question is, what is that bliss? The answer is that bliss is your original Ananda being reflected on the Anandamaya Kosha, that is on the causal body. And that is what is blissful. Now, mind you, it is still reflected Ananda. It is not original Ananda. So I want to now bring this Anandamaya Kosha in reference to happiness in the waking state, because Anandamaya Kosha is also related or responsible for any form of happiness that you and I or anyone in this world feels when we are happy. So first of all, Ananda, which means I'm going to call it happiness. So whenever I say Ananda, what am I saying? The word happiness. Why am I saying happiness? Because you can relate to it. I'm not going to use the word limitlessness because it is not the right context for this particular teaching. This Ananda is often mistaken for a state of mind. In other words, happiness is often mistaken as a state of mind. Is it not? Is this our general conclusion in this world? I'm happy, therefore, I've got happy thoughts or something. It's a state of mind. Does the mind produce happiness, or is that happiness coming from somewhere else? So let's answer this question. What's the universal conclusion to this question in respect to Ananda, that is happiness? The source of happiness is in sense objects. That is why the entire world is running after what? Kshetrams, objects. I need a new relationship. I need to feel better. I need to, have a better car, better house, more knowledge, object, some kind of, I need to set up the proper environment, object. I need to have the right friends, object. My partner needs to be like this, object. My children have to be like that, object. In other words, all of happiness is placed in objects. And therefore, we then expect those objects to comply to our particular preferences so that we can be happy. This is the general conclusion. Now, why do we think that that happiness is in sense objects? When I say sense object, it's not only external, but also internal. That means thoughts. That's why sometimes we daydream, because we enjoy the objects inside this mind. So we set up an imaginary bubble, and we kind of like, go inside this bubble, project the future, I feel so good. And then we just sort of stay in the future or the past. Like, grandparents, when I was a little kid, it was so good to be in a little, how do you call it, a swinger? The swinger was a good memory, so we stay there. Why do we think like this? The answer is because there is a lack of analysis. For example, simple analysis. If happiness was in the object, then that object would produce happiness for every single individual all the time, but it doesn't. Therefore, it has to be subjective. So it means what? The person puts personal value onto an object which was initially value neutral, but now it has gained an extra points of value only to my superimposition, atyasa, as Pavan was saying, and therefore that object now becomes worthy of my pursuit, which I then apply my jnana shakti, icha shakti, and kriya shakti in order to obtain. Now, what is the Vedantic conclusion in respect to happiness? So that was the universal conclusion. Now, Vedantic conclusion. Vedanta makes a profound conclusion, and it is not what you would usually hear. It says, first of all, there is only one source of happiness, and that is the kshetrajna. In other words, this kshetrajna, whose nature is existence, awareness, which I talked about last week, but also its nature is happiness. Yes, its nature is Ananda, but I'm going to call it happiness. So what's the nature of kshetrajna? Kshetrajna, your real nature, existence, awareness, happiness. Why do we experience happiness upon contact with objects? Let's ask that. Suppose we have a certain, suppose this is some fancy person, right? Or some fancy object. Why do we experience that happiness when we contact this? Because isn't this what the world is doing, right? All consumerism, going places, I have to be somewhere for some sake. I have to have certain amount of X in my life. Why? Only to be happy. So we're not talking about just this class. We're talking about every single person in all cultures, in all creeds, in all religions. Why is there happiness when we contact these sense objects? The reason is because the wanter, that is the desirer, is temporarily resolved. That person, that ahamkara, that's constantly saying, I need, I want, I need, I want, that temporarily gets resolved when I come in contact with this object. Isn't this our experience? We want that phone and we're thinking about nothing but the phone. The moment we contact the phone and we have that in our possession, that wanter, that desirer is now resolved temporarily. And therefore, what do we now experience? We experience a sense of happiness. Why do we experience happiness? Because the mind is no longer rippling. In other words, a rippling mind is now quiet temporarily. And what's always shining on the mind? What's reflecting on the mind? The Ananda from the Anandamaya Kosha. In other words, the Anandamaya Kosha is always reflecting the original Ananda from the Kshetrajna. That happiness in the Anandamaya Kosha is always reflecting on the mind. But why do we not always feel happy? Because the mind is constantly rippling. So the mind goes from rajasic to sattvic, goes from rippling to still. The moment I obtain an object and it's in my possession, the little voice of desire, I need this, I need that, it subsides. And what does that do to the mind? It makes it now like a nice little pond, no ripples at all. Suppose you have a still little pond, like a bucket, and it's constantly shaking and the sun is shining. Can you see the sun fully in that bucket? Not completely. You will, but it's going to reflect. In fact, it's going to be even annoying because it's going to reflect little pockets of light. So you're going to say, get this away from me. In other words, I'm not even going to like myself. Therefore, I'm going to reject myself, because what is that which is what is that which is reflecting on the mind? Kshetrajna, the knower. What's the nature of that kshetrajna? Ananda. So this Ananda is always shining on the Anandamaya Kosha. When this Anandamaya Kosha is always shining on the mind, but the mind is unable to receive it. Why? Because it is consumed by the wanter, by the desirer. And as long as that wanter desire is not resolved, that mind is ripply. And therefore, when I look at myself, when I investigate into myself, I do not know myself. Why? Because just like if you look at a bucket of water that's ripply, you're unable to identify the reflection of the sun. You can kind of make it out, but not completely. And because it's not completely still, it is only as much happiness as I receive, which is not a lot because it's not reflecting the fullness of that sun. In other words, the mind borrows not only consciousness, but it borrows Ananda.
Yeah, just wondering, what about contact with, so you got contact with a new car or a new phone or something, but what about contact with drugs or alcohol? How does that...
Sure. Same thing. Good. Same thing. So the desire, the wanter, wants, okay, who am I in a state of drugs and alcohol? I am this body. Therefore, the wanter, that is the Ahamkara, now wants to please myself. And who is myself? The Anandamaya Kosha in this particular example. So what does it then do? It then intoxicates itself so that it may enjoy it may enjoy this happiness. It may enjoy this sense of relief. But that relief is also just the desire or the wanter subsided temporarily. And therefore, even for the drug addict, where is that happiness coming from? From the reflection of the Anandamaya Kosha. So in other words, what I want to say, David, no matter what kind of happiness we ever experience, it is only of the nature of one single happiness alone. And that is the original Ananda reflecting on the Anandamaya Kosha, and that is reflecting onto the mind. No matter what circumstance you bring up, it's going to be the same explanation. Remember when I asked that question, what is consciousness? And I said it is not a part, product, or property of the body. What is happiness? Happiness is not a part, product, or property of the mind. What was the original question? Is the mind producing happiness or is it coming from somewhere else? It's coming from the Anandamaya Kosha. So what is happiness? It is not a part, product, or property of the mind, and it is also not isolated to one mind alone. In other words, happiness is an independent reality, just like awareness, just like consciousness. So whatever happiness you experience or any other person is, it is the same nature of happiness. The happiness is one and the same. But how we express that happiness changes. Sometimes we have a different facial expression. Sometimes we celebrate in different ways. Some people jump a lot. Some people kind of contain it in. But that happiness is always the same for everyone. What is the reason for all pursuits in life? Motivation for every pursuit in life is on the basis of this thinking that happiness is found in one of the four koshas, just like what David now was asking, right? So the happiness is found in external objects. And in order to feel happy, I'm going to get that external object and therefore fill these four koshas with that particular substance. So in other words, what causes us to pursue for objects? That is, I think that happiness, number one, is in external objects. And number two, I think that happiness is a product or found in one of these four koshas. But four koshas, there is no happiness to be found. Where is happiness? In the Anandamaya Kosha. What is the only way to access that happiness? By stilling the mind. So this reflected Ananda, this is experienced in three different gradings. We see an object of our desire. That's called Priyavrti. I'm now happy. Then what happens then? Moda Vrti. This is called possessing the object that I have seen. Now I'm happier. And then we have Pramoda Vrti. This is called using or enjoying the possessed object. Now I'm happiest. It's no different than dogs. Dog sees an owner in a distance. In the case of a dog, it probably smells the owner. The dog is happy, wags the tail. The owner finally comes, right? They're in contact. Dog is very happy. And then when is the dog happiest? When they're playing together. In other words, Priya, Moda, Pramoda. I see an object of desire, a little bit of happiness. I possess the object of desire, more happy. And then I enjoy or I interface or engage with the object of desire, happiest. This is the common experience in and through every single person's pursuit for happiness. Now, according to Vedanta, what is an optimal state of mind most conducive for happiness? A resolved one. A state of mind that is not chasing the three states of mind. What are those three states of mind? Priya, Moda, Pramoda. That's kind of ironic, isn't it? What's the most conducive state of mind? A state of mind is not chasing any state of mind. Because as long as it's chasing Priya, Moda, Pramoda, what's going to happen? It's going to keep on throwing little pebbles on its little water, on its little stream of water. As long as those pebbles keep being thrown, I want, I desire, I want, I desire, then no matter what you do, it will never reflect the fullness of that sun, the fullness of that Ananda. The more the mind is resolved, the more the mind is quiet, the more often it experiences the Anandamaya Kosha's reflected happiness, which is also called Advaitam. Now, why did I bring the word Advaitam in? How does this word Advaitam fit into this happiness now? Okay, let me ask you a question. When a person's genuinely happy, are they looking for something else in that moment? Right? Are they like thinking, I want to be happier now. I want to experience like pramoda. This is not good enough. I want to have even more. Are they thinking that? No. When a person is genuinely happy, in those very few moments, they're at one with themselves, they're at one with the experience. In other words, Advaitam and Ananda, or Advaitam and happiness, there's no contradiction between them. This is why Advaita Vedanta is not a philosophy. It's simply mentioning what every single person is seeking for anyway. Even if you say Advaita Vedanta is incorrect, why is a person saying that? So they can dismiss and feel good, so they can feel happy. In other words, they're dismissing in order to experience, in order to enjoy what Advaita Vedanta is already mentioning you're trying to get in the first place. So no matter what you do in this world, you're only ever doing it to preserve and to enjoy your state of happiness, because you are happiness itself. See, you wouldn't be pursuing happiness if it wasn't who you already are. This Advaitam experience is what every single individual in this world is looking for. That's why Vedanta is not a philosophy. It is a means of knowledge that simply points out what is the nature of everyone's pursuit anyway. And we simply bring it out forward so you can recognize, so my experience is not that odd as I thought, is what we're all universally looking for. This also brings the question of samadhi. What is samadhi? When we go through meditation, there's two kinds of samadhis. There's savikalpa samadhi, that means with thought, that means with the ahamkara present, and there is nirvikalpa samadhi, that means without the ahamkara present. So savikalpa samadhi is when the ahamkara remains to witness itself experiencing the Anandamaya Kosha's reflected Ananda. The ahamkara, the I sense, remains to witness that Anandamaya Kosha's bliss. That is savikalpa samadhi. What is nirvikalpa samadhi? This is whereby this ahamkara is temporarily resolved. So there's no person to go, this is me experiencing the Anandamaya Kosha Ananda. That principle, that ahamkara is gone. So what is nirvikalpa samadhi? Ahamkara has temporarily resolved, and therefore there is total identification between the kshetrajna and the Anandamaya Kosha's reflected Ananda, experiencing the full reflection of the Ananda, which is being reflected on the Anandamaya Kosha. In other words, what is nirvikalpa samadhi? It is as good as deep sleep, except there is a awareness of that. But unfortunately, there is no ahamkara to be able to come back and then to tell the story. So you have to kind of infer, okay, so it was pleasant, but I'm not quite sure if I was there, because everything is resolved during nirvikalpa samadhi. In other words, even if you chase nirvikalpa samadhi, it is still, in one sense or the other, it has its place, but it's still, if you think about it, what's the point? Because you're only getting one little dot, one little, you're contacting reflection, you're not even contacting the original. Let's go through a summary. What is this causal body from the standpoint of the waking? What is this Anandamaya Kosha function from the standpoint of the waking state? The Anandamaya Kosha's reflected Ananda surfaces when there is a favorable event that comes into your experience. So something pleasant comes right now, just imagine, and you feel happy. Where is that happiness coming from? This is a little test for you. From the Anandamaya Kosha's reflected Ananda. Is it like that for everyone? Every single person, including plants, including animals. Second point, how much of this Ananda is reflected on the Anandamaya Kosha? Maximum. It's still not the original, but maximum is being reflected on Anandamaya Kosha. And this maximum Ananda in the Anandamaya Kosha is experienced in only two possible situations. One, deep sleep, and two, Nirvikalpa Samadhi. That's the only possible time when you're able to access the maximum reflection of this Ananda. Again, this is why I say Nirvikalpa Samadhi has a certain teaching, and no doubt anyone who has talked about it will claim it is even the word infinity doesn't even do justice to the total Ananda during Nirvikalpa Samadhi. Let's bring this in a context of a ajnani and a jnani. What is a difference between a jnani's happiness and a ajnani's happiness? A wise person and a normal person. Is there a difference in their happiness? No. We've already established that because the happiness is in and through all. It is not isolated to one person. Jnani's happiness is not more than an ajnani's happiness. But what's the only difference? The ajnani, the non-wise person, says this: my happiness is because of that object. I mean, how many errors can you already pick out in that sentence? My happiness, first of all, it's not your, the irony is it is your happiness, but when they say the word my, what is they referring to? One of the four koshas. So they say my happiness is because of that object, because of this object. What does a jnani say when there is happiness? They say, this happiness is because of my own Ananda nature being reflected on the Anandamaya Kosha. Now you're going to say, so does the jnani have to know Sanskrit in order to say Anandamaya Kosha, right? No, so I'm just giving in the context of this teaching. This is the jnani understands that even happiness itself cannot be the original Ananda. Why? Because it is still an object of knowledge. That's why we call it the reflection. But it doesn't contradict your original. It is a sampler, but it doesn't contradict it. Now let's talk about the Anandamaya Kosha from the standpoint of deep sleep. All of that I spoke was the waking state. Now deep sleep. What do we say so far? Maximum bliss is experienced in deep sleep. Why? Because the mind is not there obstructing that Ananda with the mind's own turbulent ideas, own turbulent notions. In other words, there's no mind, there's no ripples. Therefore, maximum state of Ananda is experienced in deep sleep. And it is not different between you and I. Every single person, even animals that go to deep sleep, we all experience the same Ananda. There's no higher for a dog, lower for an ant, more for a fish, less for a human. It's all one same Ananda. What's the nature of that bliss experience during deep sleep? My own Ananda reflected on the Anandamaya Kosha. Why is the Anandamaya Kosha not kshetrajna? The nature of the kshetrajna is unceasing, limitless Ananda. But what's the nature of the Anandamaya Kosha's reflected Ananda? It is experienced in varying degrees. It is not always present. Therefore, it cannot be the original because the original is limitless. It is always full. So therefore, even the Anandamaya Kosha, that is the causal body, that is the Karana Sharira, even that is negated as kshetram. Also, I want to point out, Vedanta doesn't say to reject experiential happiness. This is important because now you're going to say, okay, so I'm supposed to now go, oh, okay, this happiness, no, it's not me. Just continue your day. This is not, just imagine that would be a terrible teaching. In other words, we don't say to put it under the carpet and go, oh, this is all just, kshetram and put it. No. In other words, Vedanta says, enjoy it and honor it while it lasts because it's going to come and go. It depends on, the punya papa, normal. But at the same time, recognize that it is temporary. If you don't recognize that it's temporary, then you're going to be dependent on it to be coming back all the time. So in other words, I become a slave to one more event. So recognize it is temporary, and it is also reflected on the Anandamaya Kosha. It is not original, but it is a sampler of the original. Why do I say it's not the original? Because it is a reflection on the Anandamaya Kosha. Now, having negated the Anandamaya Kosha, what is the nature of Kshetrajna? So I've now finished with the Kosha analysis. What's left? The knower of the 5 Koshas. What is it? The self-evident consciousness principle.
The reflection is just a metaphor still, right?
As a metaphor, yeah. If you start thinking reflection like the sun on the bucket, then you think your mind's probably going to produce an image of, consciousness shining down on the Anandamaya Kosha. It is just a metaphor to help us discern between Kshetrajna and Kshetram. So what was the point of this? Anandamaya Kosha is Kshetram, and you have Kshetrajna. So now I'm asking, what is the nature of this Kshetrajna? It is a self-evident consciousness principle. And this principle doesn't need any means of knowledge to be revealed. Suppose you want to learn how to cook. Then what kind of means of knowledge do you need to learn how to do that? You need cooking instructions, means of knowledge. But does someone need to tell you, to give you a lesson on the subject I, on the fact that you exist? No one needs to do that. In other words, it is already self-evident. So everything in this world requires a means of knowledge except one principle, which is the self-evident I. That's always true that's always available to myself. Now, yes, the irony is you do need a means of knowledge because we confuse this I and we mix it with the 5 koshas. So when I say we do need a means of knowledge, all it means is I don't need the means of knowledge necessarily to point out that I exist, but I do need it to help me understand what are these upadhis, what are these superimpositions. What are these superimpositions that are making it seem like the original consciousness has taken on? In other words, we need to point out these upadhis so that what can stay, what can remain, the upahita. That means that which as though takes on attributes of something else, but it hasn't actually taken on attributes at all. It only appears like it due to superimposition, atyasa. So what am I talking about so far? The characteristics of the Kshetrajna. The second characteristic is Kshetrajna, in its mere presence, it reveals everything. Just by its presence alone, things are revealed, including the 3 states. Because the Kshetrajna is true, the 3 states for everyone are illumined. That's why we all relate to the 3 states. Why? Because Kshetrajna is in and through everything. The third point is it doesn't undergo any change. For example, throughout the day, you say, I feel tired, and then you say, I feel energized. But in Kshetrajna's presence, which remains other than the energy levels, is able to recognize those energy levels. In other words, the Kshetrajna, in the presence of it, there is knowledge about the energy levels. And the fourth one is Kshetrajna cannot be contaminated. In other words, nothing can tame it, nothing can spoil it, nothing can add onto it, nothing can subtract from it. Just like if you shine a light on an impure surface, does that surface, even though the light is contacting that surface, does that surface spoil the light? No. Does that surface define the light? No. In the presence of the light, the surface, whether it is pure or impure, is illumined. But whatever is illumined never takes those attributes and sends it back to the illuminer. In other words, the Kshetrajna cannot be contaminated, because if it was contaminated, by the time you see red, if I show you something that is not so red, then you would be stuck with redness forever. But you're not stuck, are you? You're always fresh, available to see a new color. Now you see blue, and now we see red. Why? Because the Kshetrajna, the knower of these 5 koshas, always remains free of whatever undergoes in these 5 koshas, including the happiness, or including the perceptions like color, or including sounds or any kind of experience.
Where does love fit in? The strong, pure feeling of love.
When the mind is ripple free, I'm able to enjoy my own self, my own nature, which is happiness. So when we feel love, for example, honeymoon, why do we feel more love in a honeymoon, quote, feeling love, right? Why do we feel more connected in a stage of a honeymoon and less connected once the honeymoon is over? Because in honeymoon, then you know, your object of desire, your wanter desire has been suppressed temporarily, so that love that you feel is actually your own self. Because happiness and love, they do not contradict each other. They have a different kind of a different perspective, but they do not contradict each other. So the moment that wanter, desire comes back in a relationship, maybe, you know, some months later, then that level of love reduces. So where does love fit in all this? Love is nothing but that same Ananda expressing in your 5 koshas. Because the desire or the wanter is gone. This is why we sometimes feel more love, sometimes less love. Why? We feel more love because there's no person asking this other person to be something. When we feel love, when we don't want them to be anything other than what they are. In other words, we accept them as they are. Why? Because we accept ourselves in that moment. But when we don't love someone else, why do we not love them? Why do we not accept them? Because in that moment, there's some thought, some notion in our own minds that we're unable to accept.
So a lot bhakti, like that kind of love, devotional love.
Yeah, devotional love is the same thing. It's just love for your, because love is an expression of your own nature, right? You're participating in a form of actions.
Mm-hmm.
Because the nature of kshetrajna is Ananda. Ananda and happiness, as I said, do not contradict each other. So there's this person who then wants to participate in a form of bhakti. Why? Because it's enjoyable. It brings you joy, does it not, if you do bhakti? Love and Ananda are non-contradictory in nature. When you love something, you're happy. When you're happy, you love it at the same time.
What is the source of jiva? Why does jiva come into existence in the first place?
Okay, good. So the question is that Pavan posed last week was, why does Bhagavan create ignorant jivas? Why does Bhagavan create jivas that are far from truth? Now, there could be a flaw in the question itself, but I'm not going to show that yet. When you receive a question like this, what you do is you first ask, do I understand what is ignorance? And then you ask, do I understand what is Bhagavan? So we have to now ask first, what is ignorance? Adi Shankara says that ignorance is a condition of the mind in which Tamaguna dominates. What is Tamaguna? Tamaguna is the veiling power, that power which prevents the person from knowing. In other words, when Tamaguna, which I will talk in chapter 14, by the way, when Tamaguna dominates the mind, then what happens? It results in 3 conditions. First of all, there is a non-perception of the object. In other words, I do not know that object at all. I don't even see that object. Someone may see it, but I don't see it because there's non-perception of the object. The second is it creates a doubt about that object once it's perceived. So first non-perception. When I perceive it, now there's a doubt about what is being perceived. And the third one, it makes you thus perceive the object other than what it is. So first of all, Tamaguna has three effects. The first one is non-perception of the object. Second, it creates a doubt of what the object is. Third, it makes you perceive the object other than what it actually is. For example, suppose you see in the distance a stump, like a tree stump. Now, before the stump is perceived, suppose you're walking in a park, right? And it's not quite light, so you don't quite see everything, but there's still enough light to see trees. And you see a stump. First of all, before the stump is perceived, there's no knowledge of it, right? Because you're going to perceive it for the first time. So there's no knowledge of it. On perceiving the stump, what happens? A doubt arises whether it is a stump or a man. Suppose you're alone now, right? Oh, danger. I don't know if it's a stump or a man. So now what happens? I have partial knowledge because I don't know what it is completely. So due to partial knowledge of the stump, what happens then? An erroneous conclusion is made to be a man. In other words, I make an error that it is a man. Why? Because I have partial knowledge about the nature of that object, which is the stump. Partial knowledge causes projection. And all of this is due to what? Having ignorance of the stump, not having full knowledge of the stump. This is how superimposition works. This is the basis of Atyasa. I don't have the full knowledge, therefore my mind fills in the blanks with the closest approximate, and therefore it projects it onto that object. And then you have an emotional reaction that corresponds to what you have projected. If you projected a big man with a gun, then you're going to have a scary emotion according to that projection. So in other words, your reality is going to entirely correspond to your own mind's projection, owing to the person's ignorance of the original object. What else is ignorance? Ignorance is when you add up the facts wrong. So in other words, you offer 2 facts and then your buddhi adds it up and makes a mistake. For example, 2 plus 2 is always going to be 4, yeah? You can argue that all you want, it's always going to be 4. But so 2 plus 2, 2, and then plus 2 equals 4. So all of them are just objective objects. They're facts. 2 is a fact, plus is a fact, 2 is a fact, equals is a fact, 4 is a fact. The whole equation is a fact. But now suppose someone says 2 plus 2 equals 5. Where did that conclusion take place? It took place in the buddhi, in the Vijnanamaya Kosha. In other words, the ignorance is a mistaken notion due to adding up the facts incorrectly. So 2 plus 2 equals 5 does not belong to the mathematician, does not belong to the geniuses, does not belong to mathematics, does not belong to arithmetic. It belongs to whom? It belongs to that one specific buddhi which added up the facts incorrectly, owing to its own free will to take 2 plus 2, not check, therefore equals 5. Ignorance is only possible by being given free will. Animals technically don't have ignorance because they're programmed to do what they're doing. Only from the standpoint of a human being who is given the ability to think, to say 2 plus 2, and therefore to add, to be conscious of the processes going on in this mind. Only that one can have ignorance. Why? Because I added up the facts incorrectly. 2 is not wrong, plus is not wrong, 5 is not wrong, but neither is 4 wrong. But to take 2 equations and to add them up incorrectly, that itself is wrong. So now, what is Bhagavan? We answered ignorance. Now, let's talk about Bhagavan. What is Bhagavan? Kshetrajna, the knower. The same knower that is the Bhagavan. Bhagavan is the same knower because of which you and I say, I know about this, or I don't know about this. I know about this knowledge, but I'm also ignorant about this knowledge. So knowledge and ignorance has nothing to do with the knower. Knowledge and ignorance has nothing to do with Bhagavan. Meaning what? The knower, that is Bhagavan, doesn't have ignorance. Therefore, the one who doesn't have ignorance cannot create ignorant jivas. So this means even the question, why does Bhagavan create ignorant jivas? Even that is what? A conclusion in the buddhi, which is taking the facts incorrectly. Therefore, asking the question on the basis of incorrect conclusion. That's why it will never have a satisfactory answer, by the way. Now, what is the nature of Bhagavan, of this Kshetrajna, the knower? All knowledge, all power. How can all knowledge, all power be ignorant? So this same all knowledge, all power, what does it do? In the presence of itself, it helplessly projects this entire universe of many forms, of many kshetrams. Just like a singer, if there's an inherent power in a singer to sing, what's the singer going to do? Is it just going to keep it inside? No, it's going to come out. The singer is going to start singing. In that same way, all knowledge, all power helplessly projects out this entire universe of names and forms. And you, the jiva, are just one single projection. The universe of names and forms is an entire projection of this one intelligence, this one Bhagavan, one Kshetrajna. Why does Bhagavan project many? Why so many, right? Why does he have this need to project the entire? Why not just stay as limitless, intelligent existence awareness? This question will never get a satisfactory answer. You know why? Even though the Upanishads do take on this question, ultimately, it's not going to get a satisfactory answer because The mind that's asking that is an effect, is one single projection. Can a projection ever understand the cause? Impossible. It's just like describing to a child, and the child
The
says,
cause of a cause.
yeah, and the child says to the mom, hey mom, tell me the experience of giving birth and caring for me. No matter how hard the mother tries, the child's only going to get a vague idea. Why? Because, number one, there is limitation of words. And two, the listener is going to misinterpret it anyway. No matter how hard the mother tries. Now, it was surreal. Okay, now what is surreal? Let's look it up in the dictionary, surreal. Even that is not going to match the direct experience of the mother giving birth. And the second reason why the question cannot be answered is, suppose that a dream character, you're in a dream, and there's this world, this entire world of dream, like right now, this dream is happening, and there's a dream person teaching, there's dream students listening, right? And then we're going to end this dream class very soon. And then we're going to have some dream food, etc. And inside this dream, one of the people is yourself, right? And this dream character inside the dream says, why did I, the waker, project this world of multiplicity? Suppose this is a dream right now, and you're looking around and go, why did I, the waker, right, that's in bed right now, why did I project this world? Is there any point asking that? All the dreamer can do is discover that this apparent limitation is actually not true. This limitation is only apparent. This dream character is only apparent. These dream 5 koshas are only apparent. That's all the dream character needs to do. And the second, to understand the source of this entire dream world is myself. Even though I find myself in this limited form, in these 5 koshas, it doesn't matter, because my own power has projected this entire dream. Ultimately, just recognize the source of this entire world is your own self, kshetrajna. It has this amazing power, which we will talk about in later sessions, to project this world of many. Sarve bhavantu sukhinaha, sarve santu niramayaha, sarve bhadrani pashyantu, ma kaschid dukkha bhag bhavet. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. May all be happy. May all be free from illness. May all behold good things, and may no one suffer.